calling 911.
Oh,
Give me
come
that.
on.
Stop.
Hey, fix your
Stop.
hair. No.
Listen, your gum, you are chewing like a cow right now. Here.
Oh, come on. Ew.
Why are we doing this?
Have gum.
Why are we doing this?
I swear, we did this 3 years ago. Why are we doing this again?
They look the same. We don't need new photos
really
every
don't.
year.
Aren't you like 3? Come on.
Behave for the cameraman.
Well, welcome to Mother's Day at Mountain Ridge. We're excited that you're here today, and we are, if you haven't been with us, we're in a series called Crazy Normal. We've been talking about family for the last few weeks, and we'll continue to. And one of the things, probably through the whole series, the biggest takeaway, the biggest point we're trying to make is that the future of your family depends on a couple of things. It depends on how you fight, and we actually talked about that last week. It depends on how you forgive, and we're going to talk about that today. And it also depends on what you make your first concern, and we'll be talking about that over the next couple of weeks. And I think it's perfect because for most of us, family has become a little bit different than we expected, right? I mean, family, we might have had one idea of what it was going to be, and it turned out to be a little different, or maybe it's exactly what you expected it to be. But for this series anyway, we've been talking about family in a very simple definition. Family is the people that you love and live with. That's your family. Whether you're actually a blood relation or not, and whether it was the way you expected it to work out or not, that is your family, the people that you love and live with. Now, something that I can tell you about your family, you can tell me about mine, we can tell you about every family out there. Every family is dysfunctional, all right? That's just kind of the part of it. That's why we call this series Crazy Normal. There really is no normal. Things are a little bit different. What one family sees as odd, another family sees as perfectly normal. So every family is a little bit dysfunctional. And honestly, which this part is a little strange at first, there's really nothing wrong with being dysfunctional if you're doing it the right way, right? If you're the one that's, watch what I do here. If you're putting the fun and functional in dysfunction, you're fine, okay? If your family's a little different and you look at the world a little differently and you got some strange traditions that everybody else is like, that's weird, but it works for your family, and maybe you just kind of do some things that other families don't do. You like going places other families don't. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to look like everybody else. The problem is dysfunction becomes painful. Then we have a problem. If the things that we're doing are different or weird or whatever, no big deal. But if the things that we're doing are hurting the people in our family, now we've kind of crossed over. Now we've kind of reached a place where, wait, something's wrong here. We've got to fix this. We've got to address this because we don't want to raise our kids, and we don't want to be in a family, and we don't want to be the cause of a family that is dysfunctional in such a way that it's hurting our other family members. And so I want to tell you a story this morning about a family. I read this recently as I was getting ready for today. They pretty much out-dysfunction every family, right? I mean, they are so bizarre and so weird that the stuff you're going to hear it and you're going to think, that's just, nobody does that. But this family did. And as I describe it, some of you are it's going to click. You're going to be like, hey, wait a minute. I know who that is. Like, this is a famous family, all right? So the guy we're going to look at, we're going to go back to his great-grandfather, all right? So we got to go back a couple of generations here. His great-grandfather started off pretty normal, okay? He just kind of had his normal life. He was doing his thing. He met a woman. He loved her. They got married. Pretty much normal until then. And then it started getting weird. His wife was beautiful, and he went around telling people when he got in trouble that his wife was actually his sister. Just, kind of calm things down. And he actually let other men take her. And they took her away from him for a while because they thought that she was his sister, which that's pretty odd. Well, they wanted to have kids. And they weren't, and they didn't, and it had been a long time. They've been married quite a while, and they still didn't have any kids. And so, oddly enough, great-grandmother suggests to great-grandfather, why don't you sleep with the maid and see if we can get a kid that way? Now, as a guy and a husband and a dad, I'm like, that's a bad idea. You don't want to do that. You don't. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You don't want to do it. But they did, and they had a kid, which you're kind of like, okay, that's kind of an odd way to get a family, but that's how they got started. And they're going along fine and proceed over the next few years and, kind of nothing unusual. And then all of a sudden, kind of miraculously, unexpectedly, she's way past the time she should be able to be pregnant and have kids. His great-grandmother gets pregnant. And she has this baby. And everybody's excited and everybody's, looking forward to this brand new family. We've got this brand new son. And then they decide, which again, it just sounds so strange to my ears, the maid and that other child we were so excited about, they have to go away. Like they literally sent them away with nothing. No money, no help, no nothing. You just have to leave. They kicked them out. Which, again, is just kind of bizarre. Time rolls on. After about 13 years, this promised son, this one they were so excited about that finally came, their quote-unquote natural son, Dad says, hey, we got to go on a trip. Okay. He takes his 13-year-old son. He takes him up on a mountain and he says, God told me that I have to sacrifice you. And he's holding a knife over him. And he stops right at the last moment. Now, I don't know about any of you, but if I'm a 13-year-old boy and my dad did that, we've got some issues, right? I mean, we're going to have some issues the rest of our life because that's just crazy. Nobody does that. Move on to what would be the grandfather, the son that almost was sacrificed. He picked up some ideas from his dad. He kind of did some of the same things his dad did. He got married, and then he went around telling people that his wife was his sister. Which, again, just seems odd. And then, finally, they have their own kids. They have 2 twin boys, which, again, you would think, okay, maybe they can kind of put aside all the bad history and all the junk and all the stuff. We got 2 boys of our own. We can raise them. And so to add kind of more yuckiness to this whole family mess, Dad picked a favorite. He favored one son or the other. And Mom picked the other son as her favorite. So no sibling rivalry or anything like that, right? Everything's going to be fine. You know, why would that cause any problems? Well, eventually, one of the boys decides, this isn't working for me. So he tricks his brother out of everything he owns. He cheats him. His brother's mad, and so he takes off. He runs away to another country. So while he's there, he gets older. Life goes on. He meets a girl. He wants to marry her. And he does. And then he also marries her sister. Sister wives, the original story, right? He married 2 girls, bad idea in the first place, and they were sisters. Horrible idea. They start having kids. It's just kind of incredible to me. These 2 wives, these 2 sisters, start having kids. They got a little competition going on. Who can have more kids? So they decide, you know what? Let's have him sleep with our maids too. And they do. He sleeps with the maids, and then there's more kids. And before you know it, there's 13 kids in this family. 12 boys and 1 daughter. And just to add a little bit more, Dad decides to pick one favorite out of the 13. Now, I don't know what your family history is like, but I bet that's worse. Right? I mean, all the betrayal and the lying and the cheating and the sexual issues and all the stuff that went into this huge family mess. And we're going to find in just a moment, it actually gets worse. It actually gets worse somehow. And so no matter what your family history is and what their family history is, you look at this and you think, how do you deal with that level of dysfunction? I mean, people lying about people cheating each other, people running away, people crossing all kinds of weird family and social boundaries. And this is just our family, right? This is just normal for us. And in the middle of all of that, what do? See, the person we're going to look at today, his name is Joseph. His dad was Jacob. His grandfather was Isaac, and his great-grandfather was Abraham. And Joseph kind of knew his family history. It had been passed down. And Joseph knew that he was the favorite of his dad, and he also knew that his brothers didn't really like that. How do you survive in a situation like that? And Joseph found there was really only one thing he could do. The way he dealt with all that dysfunction was to forgive. And he forgave for good. And it's just pretty amazing. We're going to jump into this story of this man named Joseph and the life he lived and what happened to him as well as all the things that happened around him. So like I said, Joseph was actually his dad's favorite, which that doesn't help, right? I mean, we've all been around the teacher's pet, the brown noser, whatever. It's like, it's bad enough that they have a favorite. It's really bad when the favorite knows they're the favorite and acts like the favorite, right? That's exactly what Joseph did. His brothers, they did not like him. They didn't like him at all. And to add on to all of this, kids, be careful, he was a tattletale, right? His brothers got back at him for that. He was a tattletale, and he liked being the favorite. And if it wasn't bad enough, he got all his family together one day. He's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 14, 16 years old, somewhere around there. Gets all his family together, and he says, guys, guess what? I had a dream last night. Really? What was your dream? I dreamed that all of you bowed down to me and I ruled over all of you, including mom and dad. Isn't that great? I mean, he doesn't know when to stop, right? He's just putting more and more logs on the fire. They already don't like you. You're asking them to hate you now. And they actually did. You know, sometimes we say, I don't know if you grew up with brothers and sisters. I did. You know, I had a brother at home. We'd fight all, you know, on, off and on, all stuff. And every once in a while there'd be, I hate you too, you know. But we didn't really hate each other. I mean, we did in the moment. We were mad, we were angry, whatever, but we didn't really hate each other. Joseph's brothers, they really hated him. And there's a story that proves that. You see, they were shepherds. And if you know anything about farming and, you know, taking care of sheep and stuff, you have to move them around wherever there's food. And so sometimes they would be gone with the flocks for weeks and even months because they had to keep moving. And so one day, the brothers, not Joseph, because he was a favorite, he didn't have to go. The other 11 brothers had to take all the sheep out and live out in the open and move these sheep around. And they had been gone a while, and so Joseph's dad says, hey, Joseph, I want you to go check on your brothers. Make sure they're okay. Make sure everything's fine. And so he does, and off he goes, and his brothers see him coming. And this, to me, you know, sometimes, like I said, we're so used to the story, we don't grasp the gravity of it. When his brothers saw him coming, you know what the first thing they said was? Let's kill him. I mean, this is hate. This isn't like, we're annoyed at you, get out of my room, quit wearing my shirt. This is, you know what, here he comes. You know what we ought to do? We ought to kill him. And they start talking about how. And they start talking about how to explain it to their dad. And finally, this was the compromise. Finally, somebody says, no, let's not kill him. Let's just sell him to some traders. And they'll haul him away and we'll be done with him. And we won't actually have to, you know, kill him, but at least he'll be gone. And they did. They sold him. Which is just, you know, like I said, it's just incredible to me that the start of this boy becoming a man and everything that's been happening to him and where he finds himself in his life. His whole family history is a mess. He became the favorite and really lived it up, and he shouldn't have it. He didn't know any better. His brothers hate him, and now he's been sold. And he ends up in a foreign country, possibly in a place where he doesn't speak the language, where he knows no one, and he is somebody else's property. He is sold as a slave. A man named Potiphar buys him. It's hard to even say that. Buys another person. He bought him, and he owned him. And he started to, I mean, if this is the ultimate, I don't know what else is, if this is not the ultimate example of taking lemons and making lemonade, he starts off as a slave, the lowest slave in this house. And over a couple of years, because he worked so hard, because he has such a good attitude, because God's hand was on him, he actually becomes the number 2 person in the entire household. I mean, he's in charge of everything and everyone except for his owner, which is just kind of crazy to me. So you think, okay, bad start, rough things, but at least you're kind of making the best of it, right? Then he's falsely accused of rape and he finds himself in prison. I mean, if you're this guy, aren't you kind of like, okay, what else? You know, I mean, what else has got to happen? Prisons were not like they are today. Prisons were horrible, miserable, uncomfortable places where the average prisoner died far before they ever got close to being released. And here he finds himself in prison. And astonishingly, over the course of a few years, he finds himself again the number 2 guy to the warden. I mean, the warden trusts him. He's in charge of the prison. And one day, his friend in the prison, a government official, tells him, I had a dream. I don't know what it means. And Joseph interprets for him. He says, you know what? Good news, man. You're going to get out of here tomorrow. That's what your dream means. And please, when you get out, tell somebody about me. I'm not supposed to be here. I didn't do anything wrong. Would you please help get me out of here? Sure. The next day, exactly what he said happens. His friend gets released from prison, but he forgets about him. And I'm sure Joseph is sitting there. He's thinking, okay, maybe it's today. You know, maybe it's, okay, well, you know, it takes some time, and maybe he's got to kind of establish trust. You know, it might take a week. You know, maybe in another week I'll get out. Or maybe it takes a little longer than I thought. You know, I'm sure he's fighting for me. I'm sure you know, and a month goes by, and he's still in prison. 3 years later, somebody comes up to him and he says, hey, man, the king wants to see you. He has no idea why. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know if this is an execution or what is this? He's brought before the king and the Pharaoh of Egypt, and he's told a dream, and he says, hey, can you interpret this? No pressure if you don't get it right. And he tells him, yeah, I can. He says, not really me, but God can. And he tells him the dream, and he says, here's what it means. He says, you're going to have 7 really good years. Things are going to go great. The economy's up. There's going to be plenty of food. Everybody's going to have jobs. It's going to be fantastic. But he said, after that, you're going to have 7 really bad years. People are going to be struggling, and they're going to be scraping. There's not going to be any food to eat. There's not going to be any jobs to have. It's going to be bad, bad, bad. He goes, so what you need to do is make sure you save up during these 7 years. Put somebody in charge that can make sure everything happens so that when the hard times come, you'll be all right. And the king, Pharaoh, is so impressed by this. He puts him in charge. He goes, yeah, you're the right guy then. And so he goes from a slave to number 2 in all of the country. In 13 years, I mean, you talk about riding a roller coaster. And for some of us, if we get a bad grade on a test or have a bad day on work, it's like, it's over, I'm never going to come back. 13 years. Prison, slavery, false accusations, in and out, friends letting him down. And all of a sudden, he finds himself at the second most powerful place on the planet, because at the time, Egypt was the most dominant country in the world. I mean, this is just, these things don't happen. This is just a crazy, crazy story. But everything he said would happen did happen. 7 years, everything was great. But then the famines came. Couldn't grow any food. Nobody had any food. Nobody had any money. Nobody had any jobs. It was just terrible everywhere. And oddly enough, something that Joseph and his brothers never thought would happen, happened. As Joseph is leading Egypt, one day his brothers show up. Kind of out of nowhere, but the reality is the famine hit them too, and they were out of food. And there was a rumor going around that they've got food in Egypt. So Joseph's brothers did the only thing they knew to do. Let's pack everything up. Let's go to Egypt. Let's see if we can get some food. And I want to read to you what happens. It's so powerful. It's in Genesis chapter 42. And it says this. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all the people. And when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces on the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger. And he spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from, he asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. And although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And then he remembered his dream about them. And he said, you're spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. So Joseph's dream, it comes true. That thing that got him in trouble, that made his brothers hate him even more when he told it to him, it came true. All of a sudden, his brothers are right in front of him, and they are bowing down before him, asking, needy, helpless, in a foreign country, bowing before the ruler, asking and trying to proclaim their innocence, would you please help us? And all the mistreatment, the 13 wasted years. Can you imagine 13 years of living as a slave or living in prison? That had been his life. All of that, all at his mercy right now. The betrayal, the abuse, the mistreatment, he could do something about it. But he doesn't. As a matter of fact, he doesn't really do much of anything. He kind of tests them a little bit. He asks them some questions, kind of wants to see what kind of guys they are now. And then he sells them some food and sends them on their way. Never says who he is. Never asks them anything that would kind of lead them to believe that maybe you're Joseph, or maybe you're our brother. He doesn't do any of that. He just sends them on. And in that, he knows something. This famine is going to last a lot longer. They're going to be back. And so if you're reading this story for the first time, you might think, oh, okay, he's pretty crafty. He's laying a trap. I mean, he's really being patient. He's kind of wearing out this story. He's going to let them think that they can trust him. And then finally, there's going to be the big moment, right? Look at Genesis chapter 45, verse 1. They come back again to buy more food because they ran out of what they had eaten. And Joseph asked him a few more questions, and he's still not getting back at them, but he just can't take it anymore. Genesis chapter 45, verse 1. It says, Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. And there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him. They were terrified at his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and don't be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5, there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Which is, to me, this is just, amazing. This is next level stuff. This is the stuff they make movies about, right? I mean, this just doesn't happen in normal life, does it? I mean, when your brother-in-law or your sister-in-law or your mom or your dad or whoever it is in your family that maybe you've got some tension with, when things go wrong, this is not how we typically respond, is it? I mean, he interprets everything that happens. And this just floors me. He says, you didn't sell me. God sent me. I know you wanted to hurt me. I know you hated me. And I know what you did, even though I was a bad guy and maybe I shouldn't have done all the things I did and I shouldn't have enjoyed being the favorite and all that other stuff. And you wanted to hurt me. You hated me. You were ready to kill me. But you know what? You didn't sell me. God sent me. He has a completely different perspective. I mean, where does that come from? How can you see God's hand at work through all those failings and betrayals and pain and things he would have never seen if he refused to do one thing? If he refused to forgive his brothers, he would have never been able to get to that place. And it's an astonishing kind of forgiveness. But it's actually the best kind of forgiveness because he forgave for good. And let me explain what I mean. He forgave his family for his family's good. He knew this was not going to go well. If he harbored a grudge, if he hated his brothers, if he tried to get revenge, if he punished them, he knew this was going to hurt his family by not forgiving them. He also knew something else. It was going to hurt him if he would not forgive. See, Joseph had come to the place in his life where he realized that forgiveness is a gift to the person that does the forgiving as much as it is to the person who is being forgiven. And Joseph knew that if I don't forgive, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up being bitter and angry and frustrated, even if I get my revenge. And it makes me wonder, how could he do that? And honestly, which is great for Joseph, how could we do that? Because for many of us, we live in a dysfunctional family too. And for many of us, we have been hurt by family members in ways that in some way we don't even want to talk about. How do you get there? Because if there's a way to do this, man, you want to talk about life-changing. You want to talk about changing your family dynamic. If there's a way to do this, it could literally change everything about the way your family works. And you kind of wonder, how did he make that choice? What was it that prompted this? And he tells us, actually. Because when Joseph's father dies several years later, his brothers get scared. They kind of wonder, did he just kind of forgive us as long as dad was around, out of respect for dad? But then when dad's out of the picture, he's going to kind of go do his own thing? Did he really forgive us for good, like for always? Or was it just until? Was there an expiration date on this forgiveness that he said he gave us? He tells in Genesis chapter 50, verse 15. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? See, their consciences were not clear. They knew what they had done was wrong. Just like people in our own families, when they hurt us, they know what they've done is wrong. And they hold on to it too. You see, they need forgiveness as much as you need to give forgiveness. So they sent word to Joseph and they said, your father left these instructions before he died, and put a pause right there. Most likely they made this up. We don't know for sure. They probably just made up a story and said, oh yeah, Joseph, remember, hey, but let me tell you what dad said before he died, because you might not have heard it. He says, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I, speaking for his father, ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. And when their message came to him, Joseph wept. I don't know why he wept. I don't know if he wept because he knew that his brothers were trying to pull a fast one. I don't know if he wept because he realized that his brothers didn't really receive the forgiveness that he gave them, or if he just wept over the whole thing, the whole mess. All the stuff that's gone on in our family over these last many years. Maybe that's what brought him to tears, but it brought him to tears. In verse 18, his brothers came and threw themselves down before him. We're your slaves, they said. What a crazy reversal, right? They sold him to be a slave, and now they're saying, we will be your slaves. Verse 19, Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and he spoke kindly to them. You see, Joseph said something that a lot of us have heard, especially if you've grown up in church, you've been around church, you've probably heard something along these lines, that God works all things together for good. For those that love him, been called according to his purpose. Being sold as a slave, being accused of a crime, rotting in prison, being given up by your family, and even after you show forgiveness, even after you show mercy, being doubted by those same people, God works all things together for good in spite of all of that. And Joseph saw it. He saw the future of his family, and he realized we only move forward. This only gets better if I forgive. See, Joseph can forgive because he leaves all the writings of wrongs to God. He knows it's not up to him to fix things, to punish people, to get revenge. He realizes God's purpose is always going to win out, no matter what. No matter how upset you are with your dad, no matter how many problems you've had with your mother-in-law, no matter how many times you fought with your brother, God's purposes, they always win out. Not some of the time, not most of the time. They always win out. And if there is any repaying to be done, Joseph realized my job is to repay with forgiveness. And I know for some of you, your family pain is unimaginable. It feels impossible. And it's one of those, you don't know what they did. You don't know what they said. You don't know when they didn't. And I don't. And I don't pretend to. I know the weight of family pain can feel heavier than any other. And there's only one way forgiveness can work in your situation. You see, in the shadow of our pain, forgiveness feels like it's a gift to an enemy, to somebody that wants to hurt us. But in the shadow of the cross, where we see the forgiveness that God has poured out on us, our forgiveness of those who hurt us feels like grace from Jesus. It's really not even ultimately us that's doing the forgiving. It's Jesus who's forgiving through us. And all of a sudden, the grace we've received, the things he's done for us, begins to open up the possibility that I could forgive the one that hurt me. You see, it's really only a deep sense of gratitude over the incredible experience of forgiveness that we have experienced ourselves, that's available through Jesus because of his life and death on the cross and resurrection. Because of that forgiveness, that we can begin to forgive those that hurt us. Like I said, the weight of family sin and pain seems to just be heavier and extra. But the grace of Jesus can carry that weight, even when you can't. Because forgiveness is a gift. And when you forgive for good, it really means two things. You're forgiving for your family's good and for your own heart. Because forgiveness, actually, when you find forgiveness, it heals. It releases your heart. Because let's be honest about something. No matter how you've been hurt, no matter what's gone on in your family history, there really is no apology. There really is no punishment. There really is no humiliation that could happen to the person that hurt you where you would walk away and say, okay, I feel better now. It's not going to happen. Because healing doesn't come with revenge. Healing comes with forgiveness. And so we forgive for our family's good and for our own good, but we also forgive for good. It doesn't expire. It's not for the moment. It's not I forgive you until the situation changes. We forgive for good because Christ forgave us for good. And so your next step is super, super clear today. If there's any family pain, if there's any offense that's happened to you within your family, whether they've asked for forgiveness or not, whether they deserve it or not, whether they even want it or not, your next step is to forgive for good. For their good, for your good, and because of the way Christ has forgiven you. Now, some of you might say, well, I can't do that. I don't know what it's like to be forgiven in the first place. Then maybe your step is to begin a relationship with Christ so that you could actually understand what it feels like put all that stuff down, to walk without guilt and shame, to feel a sense of freedom that the chains and the things that hold you back and hold you down have been broken finally. That you can have a new heart and a new life. Because until you have that, you're right. You really can't forgive for good. So I don't know what your step is. Maybe it's to find forgiveness. Maybe it's to give forgiveness. But my prayer for you today is that you would forgive for good. Let's pray together.